First and foremost, I do not tolerate any Chrisean slander, so none of that in the comments. Despite Chrisean Rock's public prominence, she faces silence and scrutiny regarding her own experiences, which reflects a broader issue of ongoing abuse against Black women. Rooted in historical legacies, this abuse perpetuates an atmosphere of shame and scrutiny, reproducing the cycle of abuse. Throughout history, Black women's abuse has been unjustly justified or attributed to their own actions, resulting in lasting negative perceptions of Black women. This leads to societal tendencies to excessively police and scrutinize their bodies, undermining their autonomy. Experiences Chrisean unfortunately endures in the public eye. First, let's talk history. Black women were in a position where two hierarchical systems were against them, one based on race, the other based on gender. This allowed for their abuse on multiple ends as well as its justifications. Within colonialist framework, enslaved women were nothing more than producers of labor and had no rights in a racial hierarchy. Within enslaved populations, they could be subject and victim to gender dynamics which would allow for further abuse. Enslaved women's bondage was different. It was more focused on their sexual exploitation and the value of their bodies. As such, the colonial system allowed for the abuse of their bodies. What more were they than objects of value? Either way, a lot of Black women's value came from the use of their bodies, and within the system, they had no say over their bodies. One example of this is through the McCoy sisters. These were two conjoined twins who were enslaved throughout most of their life and whose parents were forced to sign them into slavery. People often characterize the relationship with their owners as mutual and positive, but they were literally enslaved children and had no choice. Any agency that narratives write about cannot be validated, as within the system of slavery, Black people did not have any agency, especially Black women. A lot of people also like to talk about the McCoy sisters' lasting relationship with their owners. However, when we think back to the fact that Black people do not have agency within a colonial system, the quote-unquote choice for them to remain with these owners wasn't much of a choice, or at least needs to be further investigated. Similarly, these racial and gender hierarchies can be compared to the music industry. These industries are also hierarchical and exploitative. Rules and perceptions of who's best or what's acceptable or what will be scrutinized very much inform the industry. Many artists often have less agency than the public assumes due to corruption. As such, it's difficult to see anyone new entering the industry as having a lot of agency. Looking at how Chrisean met Blueface, the dynamics were already messed up because their relationship was built on the entertainment industry. They literally met on Blue Girls Club, which was supposed to be a dating show, but the girls on the show were literally made to fight for his love. So to begin with, you're already being told that the only way for you to be a contender is to engage physically. Then, during the show, his baby mother allegedly jumped Chrisean, resulting in her to lose her tooth. Soon after she was chosen as the winner, their relationship began and he immediately signed her to his label. Under the music label, it was a very financially controlling situation. During their relationship, Blueface would often make comments in interviews or on social media that Chrisean was actually wasting him profits. However, in many Instagram lives during and after their relationship, Chrisean would say that Blueface had control over all of her earnings while she was signed to his label. She mentions having no control over her money until after they were officially separated. One TikTok user, Hot Weird Girl, said in a video that Chrisean signed an agreement where he, Blueface, gets most of her money. He literally has a financial incentive to keep abusing her in the public eye. People within the industry are also bystanders and perpetuate the violence that women like Chrisean face because they do not take the violence seriously. People in the industry have not taken Chrisean's abuse seriously. Within the rap industry and the Black community, Blueface often spreads a narrative of Chrisean being childlike or unruly, similar to the American patriarchal system, sending out messages of Black women being infantile and needing to be domesticated and controlled. Nobody's stepping up once these allegations were made public, so it definitely implies that nobody was stepping in when the abuse was still private. Others in the industry, like Natalie Nunn, or interviewers, like in the No Jumper interview that was earlier this year, just make fun of Chrisean when things don't go their way or to harp on comedic aspects of her identity. Anytime Chrisean calls out Natalie's hypocrisy or confronts her for lying to or about Chrisean, Natalie then claims that Chrisean is childish and brings up the abuse, either placing blame on Chrisean or mocking the abuse. Whatever agency people tried to have was often punished or met with further scrutiny when we're looking at the historical legacies of abuse that Black women have faced, which is very similar to Chrisean in the choices that she's made. During enslavement, women would try to resist, and often it was through their bodies. They would attempt to fight back, take their own lives, or find a way to reclaim agency. Yet, enslavers' control over their bodies was meant to uphold the American patriarchal power over the plantations. So having plans for their own bodies meant Black women are violating the terms of enslavement. Similarly, Chrisean is partially punished with social media backlash when resisting, and it echoes messages and abuses perpetuated by Blueface. One example is how Blueface would often go live or make videos filming Chrisean being quote unquote crazy, or there would be videos of Chrisean fighting back or yelling while Blueface is seemingly calm or calling her names. Another quote that previous TikTok user I mentioned said was that Blueface remains calm in the face of her antics in order to paint himself as the rational one because he can no longer make money if he's the abuser. A common tactic abusers use is appearing to remain calm after alleged abuse, then deducing their abuse partner's reactions as overreactions or simply being crazy. A term that can be applied to Chrisean's reactions is reactive defense. Another term is reactive abuse, but I do prefer to use the term reactive defense. This occurs when victims like Chrisean, who've dealt with abusive behavior for a long time, reach an internal breaking point. They literally cannot take it anymore. The prolonged physical or emotional abuse that they've experienced makes them lash out in attempts to defend themselves in these abusive situations. Another quote that the TikToker said was, "I'll be damned if a human trafficker makes me believe Chrisean Rock is a bad person and not an abuse victim." And this is a quote that I wholeheartedly agree with. Despite this, social media viewers often side with Blueface's narrative, expressing more sympathy for Blueface than Chrisean. In responses to videos on their show of Chrisean hitting him, these were some of the comments. "He's so tired of that relationship. I could tell from the look on his face he just want to leave her. Poor Blueface. I feel so bad for him in this scene. Bro should get a restraining order." All just like crazy things that make it seem like Chrisean is the one who's in the wrong, who's the main abuser, or just the one who's abusing Blueface, when in reality she's a victim of abuse and is very much trying to fight for her life. Perceptions have also resulted from the historical abuse of Black women's bodies, and in turn, these perceptions are used to further justify the abuse. There's a lot of caricatures, and the ones that people are most common with are the Mammy caricature and the Jezebel caricature. The Mammy caricature was born from labor exploitation and then using this perception as a justification for Black women being good caretakers and exploiting them in that way during enslavement. The Jezebel was born from sexual exploitation, such as breeding or sexual assaults. This allowed white men to justify using enslaved women's bodies or sexually assaulting them as they were just so enchanting or quote unquote irresistible. The sapphire caricature is another one that's arisen over time, and some refer to it as the combination of these two previous caricatures. Originally, it didn't stick much until the creation of the Andy and Amos show, where they started portrayals of Black women as domineering, aggressive, and emasculating. This was also technically a minstrel show, as I think there was only like one Black character in the entire show, so everybody else was in blackface during the show. You can also see examples through shows like Good Times, Sanford and Sons, or popular blaxploitation era films like Coffee, starring Pam Grier, or other mocking images of contemporary Black women like Michelle Obama. All of these caricatures have different meanings, but all of them were used at one point or another to control Black women's agency over their bodies and how they are perceived for how their bodies are used, whether they make the choice to use their bodies in that way or not. Again, this is where Chrisean comes in, as throughout her fame, people have mocked her character or viewed her as merely a personification of something rather than an actual human being. Perceptions of the sapphire caricature can be fitting for Chrisean in terms of how some of the public eye views her. People negatively label her as aggressive, overly masculine, and it's important to note that caricatures like the sapphire were also specifically used to punish women who didn't fit societal norms of being passive or servile. I think that because she's been on reality shows where she's fought, like Bleak Girls Club, South Central Baddies, and the Baddies franchise, some viewers perceive her as violating some sort of social contract for women, and then they often use this perception to justify her abuse or dismiss it when hearing about her abuse. Under a post about her being beaten by Blueface with subsequent photos and videos, one user's only comment is, "She's so manly." As caricatures were historically sensationalized, resulting in sticking stereotypes, many people did not see Black women past these stereotypes, just as many people do not see Chrisean past these online perceptions. They see her personality and immediately deduce it to being too much, too loud, too aggressive. The punishment coming from this, in addition to misogynoir and abuse, is the continued justification and blaming of her abuse. Looking at history and other scholarly work, there were also perceptions that blamed Black women for the abuse they experienced. Rather than holding accountable those who abused them, it was their own fault for being with men who'd abused them. One study shows that white women attributed more blame on a Black victim of sexual assault than a white victim. In another part of the study, words like innocent and trusting were used to describe white victims, while naive was used mostly for Black women. Describing a victim abuse as naive rather than trusting sends a message that they are in part to blame for their abuse. Had they been less naive, they wouldn't have been in that position. Many comments assume this on Chrisean. One reads, "Don't let him have that much power over you to make you feel like he's the only one that can make your life better." While comments like these attempt to be uplifting, they just echo messages that assume the amount of agency Chrisean has in the relationship, placing both blame and responsibility on Chrisean for the abuse. In addition to people viewing Chrisean as aggressive and using it as a justification for her abuse, many of these people also use these perceptions to victim shame her or further scrutinize her choices when she shows vulnerability. People tend to justify the abuse by attacking her personal character, often overlooking the previous trauma or environments where she's felt she's had to defend herself or has had to fight in order to survive. They also justify the abuse because she keeps going back to the relationship. This modern victim shaming is strongly rooted in the historical abuse that Black women face and its subsequent dismissals, as Black women had no voice in the abuse that was enacted upon them was always justified. Despite being in traumatic environments that constantly abused them, they were constantly blamed and held responsible for their own abuse. This is analogous to women in domestic violence situations. While I have mentioned some components in terms of psychological abuse that can be associated with domestic violence, because of the length of this video and my original research, I won't be going into that topic. However, I do encourage all of you guys, anybody who wants a better understanding, to learn about these psychological components. A lot of people lack knowledge around psychological parts of abuse and why someone in an abusive relationship may stay or return to that relationship, especially if they've experienced traumas throughout childhood, as Chrisean has. So I just think it's really important to understand, and I think it definitely helps mitigate the victim shaming. Statistics do also show that 40% of all Black women experience domestic violence in their lifetime, which is almost 10% higher than white women. Despite this, they experience arguably more public stigma, silence, and victim blaming. Add this on with racial history, these barriers make it difficult for Black women to ask for help, find safety, or even receive that help if they do ask for it. Yet they continue to get blamed for remaining in abusive relationships despite these alarming statistics and barriers. And these statistics are just based off of those who reported, when in reality, for every one person that files a report, many do not. Moreover, a professor specializing in the violence enacted against Black women stated that victim blaming tends to be the result of reactions to Black women's disclosure of violence and abuse, with the reactions reflecting stigmatized societal beliefs around survivors of violence. Another example is Megan Thee Stallion and just how crazy some people were being after she got shot. And I'm not going into was it Tory, was it her friend, or any of that. In one way or another, varying people blamed her for getting shot, with many justifying the abuse by attacking her size, her stature, or her sexually liberated public persona. In like manner, any of the times where Chrisean disclosed her abuse or showed pictures of a bloodied face, people felt that she was deserving of such abuse or complacent in it. Consequently, there exists a tendency to assume that there is no point in providing help, or that she is willingly choosing to endure the abuse. Rather than offering support or investigating the dynamics of the relationship, people just spew insults and blame her. One comment from the shame room read, "She love it, so leave her be," while another said, "This shit is sad and tired. One of them needs to be a bigger person and end that toxic ass relationship." Moreover, mainstream media contributes to victim blaming narratives when reporting gender based violence, and mainstream media also perpetuates misogynoir. This puts Black women in a place where their abuse is not taken seriously, they're blamed for it, or it's justified. This is unfortunately true for Chrisean and how media apps like Twitter and Instagram amplify these perceptions through algorithm and what's quote unquote trending. All of these things just make it seem like she's not deserving of justice. As historical and contemporary examples show, this victim shaming is often accompanied by scrutiny. As property of enslavers, enslaved women's bodies were seen as commodities, so any choice they could make with their bodies would be punished and scrutinized as it wasn't theirs to begin with. The lines are more blurred, but Chrisean's body is also a commodity, similar to enslaved women. This means that while she can profit off her image, what she does with that image, her body being the physical part of this image, is also a point of contention in the public eye. To be clear, I don't personally think that Chrisean's body is a commodity, just that the way that the public views and consumes it is like a commodity. However, for people whose abuse has often been tied to their body also becomes an important place for resistance, enjoyment, even transcendence. As such, the only person who can really judge what Chrisean does with her body is Chrisean. While some people may disapprove of the choices she makes because of what she's faced, only she knows the true meaning and feeling of these choices. However, while the body is not only a site for suffering, when there's so much disapproval over one's body, the public eye can definitely designate it as a place of suffering. During her relationship, a lot of people were against physical choices that she made that could be linked to Blueface. So in terms of like her tattoos, her teeth, or her pregnancy. On a picture of her and her newborn child, one comment reads, "Either hide that tat of him or have it removed. Clearly, you don't need the disrespect and negativity in you or a junior's life." Another one reads, "It's time to remove that tattoo of that man that keeps disrespecting your baby." On another post, on Instagram from Hip Hop Ties, they referred to her as Bluetooth after she got the tooth that had Bluetooth's image on it. Then they asked for public opinion of the relationship. Here are some of the comments. "Another girl just lost her soul to the Matrix. What the hell is wrong with this B word?" Many people disapproved also of Chrisean carrying her child with Blueface to term. They believed it was not acceptable for her to have a child by someone who abused her. One person wrote, "I hope it's fake. She don't need no baby from this man. Your child will be the one suffering while you run behind this man." Another comment reads, "IDKY, you know y'all relationship is toxic, yet you can't wait to have a baby with him. Get an abortion. This child is going to be miserable being born in this bullshit." While a third comment reads, "Blueface had Chrisean do 3 abortions. She can't learn," mocking her for having to go through the abortions. These comments are especially harmful as in a later live on Instagram, trying to justify why she wants to keep the baby, Chrisean revealed that she was pregnant 3 times during the relationship, and each time, Blueface very much pushed her to get the abortion. At this point, she was finally choosing what she wanted to do with her body, and she chose not to get another abortion and wanted to carry the pregnancy to term. However, she faced so much scrutiny and ridicule for it. Personally, I love Chrisean. It's true, maybe I first just started loving her because I connected so deeply with her and her story. Having your story dismissed is an unfortunate tale that many Black women have had to hold throughout time and still do. It's hard to find a way back from abuse, especially when you do not have strong supports and are positioned in a place where society will automatically assume you're at fault or could have done more. My aim in just doing this research, because originally this was for a paper, was to investigate why there's not more support and why there's so much shaming and see what those connections were to historical abuse. My hope is to promote more growth, more healing, and more community. Well, maybe at least more sisterhood. So many people are already against Black women, and there are systems that continuously aim to ensure that, well, this is the case. However, I think with more understanding, knowledge, and empathy, some of these systems can start getting dismantled. Or at least maybe we can create more empathetic communities that want to help victims and survivors of abuse. Looking at how things from the past still affect us brings up important questions about why some people think it's okay to hurt Black women and control what they do. It's really important to understand these reasons so we can tell better stories and create spaces that help abused women heal instead of making things worse. Another thing to think about is how society sees Black women as either really strong or as victims, and this affects what people expect from them. Also, we need to look at old stereotypes about Black people, not just the obvious ones, to really understand how history still affects us. Using Chrisean as an example, the whole point of this video, this project, was to show how things from the past still happen today, and we need to work together to stop the cycle of hurting and shaming abused people and talk about these issues in a caring and informed way. If you're the victim of domestic violence or abuse or know anybody who may be dealing with this, here are some hotlines and resources that may be helpful. You can also always reach out to local organizations and advocacy centers in your area. Stay safe and don't be ignorant.